The first time Ifwiko danced, she cried. The floor was cold stone, slick with oil. Her bare feet slipped, blistered, bled. The chain around her ankles, two silver cuffs bound with a braided link, clinked with every movement, each sound a reminder that this was not a performance but a sentence. Her dress was too thin for the cold marble halls, her stomach hollow with hunger. And yet the lords and ladies who watched her clapped as if she were a jester at a festival. She was 7 when they took her. A landowner had come to her village with promises of gold and grain. He told her parents he needed a girl to serve in his household, to help in the kitchen, to sweep the halls. He said she would be clothed, fed, and taught to read. Her mother was hesitant. Her father, too tired and too poor, nodded yes. Ifwiko remembered her mother's hands, rough with work, trembling as she packed a bundle for the journey. She remembered her mother's last words, "If it is not good there, find a way to return." But there was no return. Not when the carriage passed the river boundary where the landowner's word ruled stronger than any king's. Not when they fitted her ankles with silver and threw her into a room too small for even a chair. Not when the tutor they promised was a woman who only came to feed her silence and take measurements for new costumes. They named her Oni Ajoji, the strange one. The landowner's wife declared her exotic. A girl from the mud, turned to beauty for the sake of art. Each evening they summoned her to the center of the long banquet hall. A fire blazed at one end. Musicians played soft, mocking tunes. The nobles lounged on pillows, drunk on palm wine and cruelty. And Ifwiko danced. At first, clumsily. In fear. Her arms trembled, her movements unsure. But when she paused too long, the steward would come forward. He carried a long wooden stick. He never struck her face. They said it must remain beautiful, but her back bore welts in the shape of vines. "You'll learn to be graceful or you'll learn to starve," he told her once, tossing her the heel of a loaf. So she learned. Her feet moved more swiftly. Her hands floated like birds. She mimicked the wind, the river, the trees of home she barely remembered. When she danced, they called her spellbinding. When she cried, they said the tears made her performance more powerful. "Pain is the purest form of beauty," the landowner's wife once said, snapping her fan shut. And the girl wears it so well. Ifwiko didn't know how many seasons passed. Time became a cycle of hunger and movement. Her body grew taller, thinner. Her eyes dulled. The silver cuffs remained, cleaned often to shine beneath torchlight. No one asked her name anymore. She was the dancer, the savage rose, the little broken thing. She ate only after a performance and only if the crowd was pleased. Once she collapsed mid-step. Her legs gave out, her ribs too tight with hunger. The steward dragged her from the floor while the nobles murmured, disappointed. For 3 days they fed her nothing. She curled in her cell-like room, staring at the silver cuffs, trying to remember what her mother's face looked like. One day, a visiting artist came from the capital. He wore silks and carried charcoal in a long, slender case. He watched her dance, then asked to sketch her. She stood still for hours while he drew. "You are a thing of tragedy," he told her. "A living sculpture." She did not respond. He held up the drawing, her arms outstretched, chains glinting, eyes hollow. "They'll hang this in the gallery of expressions," he said proudly. That night she did not sleep. She stared at the ceiling until the moon carved its way across the window. Then she sat up, slowly, and traced the scar across her ankle where the cuff had rubbed too deep. She ran her fingers over the chain. She had danced for them, starved for them, cried for them. And they had called it art. What would they call it if she stopped moving entirely? The next evening they gathered again. The hall buzzed with laughter. A lord played the flute poorly. Someone spilled wine on the cushions. And then she entered as always, silent, slight, graceful. She took her place in the center. The music began. She didn't move. They waited. The music changed tempo. Still she stood. "Begin," snapped the steward from the corner. Her head turned slightly but her body remained still. A ripple of confusion passed through the guests. "Is she unwell?" someone asked. "She must be tired," another chuckled. "She'll start soon. They always do." But she didn't. Not that night. Not the next. She had learned something. Stillness unsettled them more than weeping. So she held herself still as if carved from grief. They sent the steward to threaten her. She did not blink. They brought the artist's drawing, hoping it would remind her of her glory. She stared through it. The landowner fumed. "She's defiant," he said. "Ungrateful." But he didn't kill her. They had made her too important, too famous among their circles. To harm her now would raise questions, rumors. So they waited. And she did not move. Days became weeks. No dance. No performance. No bows. No tears. Only silence. Only hunger. But the villagers began to whisper. Somehow word escaped the court walls. A merchant who delivered flour. A servant who pitied her. A cousin of a guard. They told the story. The girl who dances no more. They said she stared like a goddess carved from storm. They said she was punishing them with her stillness. That her silence was a curse they had earned. The laughter in the court grew thinner. Applause turned to discomfort. Some guests stopped attending the performances. Others tried to provoke her, mocked her, poured wine at her feet, played crude songs. She did not flinch. And in her stillness they began to see themselves. Not their beauty. Their hunger. Their cruelty. Their ugliness. The landowner stopped hosting banquets. The hall grew quiet. The steward lost his job. And if Wiko remained, a girl in silver cuffs, who no longer moved for anyone but herself. One morning the cuffs fell off. Not with force. Not with keys. She simply stood and they slid down her ankles like water. She picked them up and left them on the pillow where the landowner once sat. Then she walked out the great doors. No one stopped her. No one dared. When she returned to her village, her mother wept. Her father stood still as a tree, his shame too wide for words. She said nothing for many weeks. But sometimes, when the wind blew through the trees, the children saw her move, not to entertain but to remember. She danced not with pain but power. And when they asked, "Teach us," she smiled. But she never wore silver again. The shoes arrived in a velvet box. Red. Not the soft, playful red of berries or ribbon, but a deeper hue, closer to rust, to sunset before a storm, to something dried and hidden. They gleamed unnaturally, even in the dim torchlight of the steward's chambers. The inside was lined with something soft, and when Ifwiko touched them, the fabric felt warm. Too warm. Like skin that had just stopped breathing. "They're a gift," the steward said, holding out the box. "From the lady herself. For your return." Ifwiko did not reach for them. It had been weeks since she stopped dancing for the court, since she had walked out of that house with her silver cuffs clinking behind her. But her feet still bore the memory of stone floors and blistered skin. Her body still recoiled at rhythm. She stared at the shoes without moving. "They won't wear down," the steward continued, forced smile twitching. "Magic, they say. You'll never feel the ground again. Never bleed." She said nothing. But her fingers eventually moved. They hovered over the red leather. And something inside the left shoe moved. Just slightly. Like breath caught in a throat. She drew her hand back. "You'll wear them," the steward said, pushing the box into her arms, voice stiff now. "You belong to the court whether you dance or not." That night, alone in her hut, she placed the shoes in the corner, facing the wall. But they turned. Not visibly, not in motion. Yet every time she looked again, they were angled toward her. Waiting. She didn't wear them. Not the first day. Nor the second. But hunger returned as it always did. The landowner had stopped sending food to her mother's hut. The steward's delivery was not kindness. It was a leash. And so, on the fourth day, she sat on the floor, staring at her bare feet. Then she slid one shoe on. It fit perfectly. The second slid on like breath. No pain. No resistance. They were too soft, too easy. And when she stood, she felt nothing. No weight. As if the earth no longer held her. As if she'd become something hovering just above the world. She took one step. Then another. And the shoes purred. That night the dreams came. Girls, young, older, some no more than toddlers, dancing. All of them barefoot, all of them burning. Their feet blackened, then charred. But their faces didn't scream. Their mouths were open wide, but no sound came out. Their eyes stared forward, fixed on something only they could see. Behind them, a great fire twisted like a crown. It licked the sky, casting red shadows across the ground. Ifwiko woke gasping. The shoes sat by her bed. She hadn't removed them. She tried to pull them off. They stayed. Tugged tighter. Something whispered from within the leather. It was not one voice. It was many. Thin, soft, brittle. Layered like threads in cloth. "Do not stop. Do not sleep. Keep dancing. We're still watching." She stumbled to the door and threw the shoes into the yard. But when she turned to enter the hut again, they were on her feet. She hadn't moved. Her mother found her at dawn, circling the compound in slow, gliding steps. "Child? I can't stop," she whispered. Her mother tried to reach for her, but the shoes hissed. A thin streak of blood smeared across the dust where she danced. It wasn't hers. It was old. Dried. sinking into the ground like water from a spilled cup. That day she danced without rhythm, without song, without purpose. The shoes moved her. They bent her knees, lifted her heels, made her arch and twist and leap. She did not feel tired, but she felt used, as if her muscles were not her own. The shoes did not let her fall. They did not let her rest. And when night came again, so did the dreams. The girls returned. This time they were closer. Their skin cracked with heat. Ash clung to their lashes. The youngest of them stepped forward and reached for Ifwiko's hand. Her fingers were bone. "Don't forget us," she mouthed. Then she burned. The next morning the shoes wept. Not with tears. With blood. A thick red smear pooled beneath her heel as she sat beneath the fig tree. No wound on her skin. No cut, no mark. But the blood was fresh, and it came from the soles of the shoes. She kicked them against a rock. They did not move. She tried to slice the leather with a blade. The blade broke. She whispered to them. Cursed them. Begged them. They only whispered back. "You are the last. The final dancer. Finish our steps. End it." She screamed, and for a moment, just one, the whisper stopped. Then came a voice clearer than the others. "Older. You carry the fire now." That night the fire came for real. Not in dreams. Her body moved as if summoned. She rose from the mat, feet gliding on their own, eyes wide open. She stepped outside. The shoes turned her toward the edge of the forest, where a clearing sat untouched for years. A ring of stones. An old shrine to a forgotten deity. And there a flame waited. Small. Quiet. Beckoning. She stepped into the circle, the shoes clinking softly. One by one the girls from her dreams appeared. Not flesh. Not ghost. But smoke shaped like memory. Each wore red shoes. Each bled from them. But their faces were calm now. They circled her. And together they danced. Not for amusement. Not for cruelty. For release. For mourning. For one final song. Ifwiko did not lead. She followed. They bent and swayed and spun. The fire grew higher, casting long shadows against the trees. And then one by one the girls stepped into it. Not screaming. Not afraid. Just free. When the last one disappeared into the flame, Ifwiko stood alone. The shoes burned. Not with heat but with light. They pulsed, cracked, and finally fell from her feet. She stepped out of them barefoot. Her toes touched earth. Real earth. She turned back once. The shoes had turned to ash. When she walked home, each footprint she left in the dust filled slowly with red. But it was not blood. It was memory. The girls had left something in her. A voice. A warning. A legacy. She did not dance again for many days. But when she did, it was not for anyone's gaze. It was a story. And in that story the shoes wept one last time, through her. They returned the silver cuffs. Not out of necessity, she hadn't tried to flee, but out of showmanship. The nobles missed the sound. They claimed the performance lacked music without the chime of chain on stone. So the cuffs were polished, reclasped around Ifwiko's ankles and presented like jewelry. "Art must echo," the landowner's wife said. "Let her sing through iron." The links were the same as before. Cold. Heavy. Beautiful in a way that beauty should never be. But something had changed. Not in them but in her. She no longer flinched at the touch of silver. She let them lock the cuffs without a word, without tears. But the silence she wore was not surrender. It was waiting. That evening they gathered as they always did. Lords in golden robes, ladies in veils stitched with diamonds, priests with wine cups and sly, knowing eyes. The hall shimmered with torchlight. The drums began to beat, soft and slow, like a heart that didn't know it was dying. Ifwiko stepped into the center. The chains dragged behind her. Then something strange happened. They began to hum. It started with a soft vibration. Barely a breath. Like wind sliding through a flute. But the sound didn't come from the walls or the floor. It came from the cuffs. She paused mid-step. The chains jerked. Not violently, just enough to pull her forward like a reminder. So she moved again. And again the humming returned. Low and steady. Matching the rhythm of her heartbeat. She tried to slow down. The cuffs tightened. She sped up. The humming grew louder, almost melodic. She lifted her arms, twisted, let the momentum carry her. Her breath grew sharper. Her feet stung. The chains slid and caught and clinked in time with her every motion. The nobles clapped. Delighted. They thought it part of the act. They always did. Until she stumbled. She hadn't meant to pause, but a sudden ache in her side bent her slightly off balance. It was enough. The chains yanked her forward. She fell to her knees. A roar of laughter rose around the room. Wine sloshed. Hands slapped tables. Even the landowner chuckled, tossing a plum into the air and catching it. She stayed down, face to the floor, breathing, listening. The chains shifted slightly. Then a voice. Not loud. Not even spoken. More like memory. More like metal remembering speech. Don't stop, not yet. She lifted her head. A maid near the far pillar gasped. Later, the maid would swear on her mother's bones. I heard it. I heard it say something. I'm not mad. The chain spoke. But in the moment, no one believed her. Ifwiko rose, slow as smoke, and continued to dance. Not for applause. Not for food. But to listen. The humming was clearer now. It curved beneath the drums, beneath the flute, sliding like water through the notes. It matched her every movement, not just the rhythm but the intention. When she spun fast it coiled. When she twirled soft it whispered. And always beneath the notes, don't stop. After the performance they threw coins at her feet. The chain stopped humming the moment she bowed. The steward retrieved her and led her back through the marble corridor. The cuffs stayed tight but silent now. That night she could not sleep. She sat with her feet drawn to her chest, staring at the links resting across her ankles. She ran her fingers over them. They were cold, lifeless. She whispered, "What are you?" The chain didn't reply, but her pulse slowed. And as it did, a faint vibration returned. It wasn't music. It was breath. That was the first night she felt them move on their own. Not pulling. Not dragging. Pacing. They shifted when she shifted. Matched her breath. Mirrored her sleep twitches. She was never alone again. When she danced the next night, she leaned into the sound. Her heartbeat guided her steps. Her pain tuned it. The chain did not hurt her, it shaped her. It lifted her foot at the exact moment her knee bent. It pulled her turn sharper than her spine could manage alone. It carried her, not like a burden, but like a secret partner. And still, the nobles thought it part of the act. They laughed louder. Clapped harder. They didn't notice the look in her eyes was different now. Focused, far away, burning. The chain was no longer a prison. It was a memory passed through metal. Sometimes, between steps, it whispered fragments. Her name was Nairi. 14 winters. Starved on the third moon. Danced until her knees cracked. Girls. Others. Before her. The chain had held them too. It sang their names, not always whole, but enough. Enough to make her feet grow steadier. Enough to make her breath grow calm. One day she asked it aloud, "Why me?" The cuffs warmed. "Because you hear us." The steward noticed the change first. He began watching her with narrowed eyes, unsure what had shifted. She was still dancing, still obedient, but something in the way she moved unnerved him. She looked less like a girl and more like a force. A woman-shaped dancer. That night, he snuck into her chamber while she lay half asleep. He brought a file of bone and a vial of oil. He meant to loosen the cuffs. Break whatever had taken root. But the moment he touched the chain, it flared with heat. A sound like a cry, metal, ancient, ripped through the room. The steward staggered back, burned. The cuffs settled again. Ifwiko sat up. The chain buzzed with warning. She said nothing. She didn't have to. He never came near her again. The maid, the same one who had first heard the whisper, began leaving small offerings near Ifwiko's door. A flower, a pebble shaped like a crescent, a feather. She said they were for the voices. "The ones in the chain," she whispered. "I believe you carry them." Ifwiko nodded. She did not know how many souls lived inside the iron. But she felt them. Some days it was a single voice. Other times dozens murmuring at once, like wind through dry leaves. They weren't angry. They were waiting. Each dance carried something forward. Each twirl a prayer. Each bow a name lifted. She began dancing differently. Not just to entertain. To remember. And as she did, the chain changed. The silver dulled to gray. The cuffs thinned at the edges, not cracking, not rusting, but fading. They no longer held her. She held them. She was not the dancer anymore. She was the archivist. The last step in a line of lost feet. The landowner noticed the change late. By then even his guests grew uneasy. "She moves like she's not here," one lord muttered. "Like something else is dancing." Another whispered, "Sometimes I swear I hear singing, but it's not the instruments." When the landowner tried to remove the cuffs himself, the chain coiled like a snake. It didn't strike. It warned. He backed away. And Ifwiko, silent, returned to the center of the room. She danced. The chain sang. And for the first time the laughter stopped. At first it was one print. Barely visible. A crescent mark on white stone, the shape of her heel outlined in something red. Not bright like fresh blood but darker. Thicker. The kind of red that dried too fast and smelled of rust and memory. Ifwiko noticed it after her third turn across the banquet hall. She paused slightly, catching the color out of the corner of her eye, but did not stop. The chains hummed steadily around her ankles, the cuffs cool, guiding her steps with the same precision they always had. She looked down again. Another print. Then another. Trailing her now. She hadn't been struck. Her skin was whole. Her feet bore no fresh wounds, only old scars, pale and healed. She felt no pain, only the slow, pressing rhythm pulsing through her chest, her bones, the floor. The chains caught the sound, echoed it, translated it. It was not hers alone. She was dancing for all of them now. When the nobles began to murmur, she heard them. Is that blood? Her feet don't look injured. Someone spilled wine, perhaps. The landowner waved them off with a laugh. Let her finish, he said. We'll mop her up later. She kept moving. The chain pulled forward, not hard, not cruel. It nudged her like a current nudges a drifting boat. Forward, spin, step back, bow. And each movement left behind another print. A story. A warning. A stain. By the end of the performance, the floor was a map. Crimson arcs. Half moons. Toes pressed into the center like stars orbiting something ancient. The guests clapped. Polite. Uneasy. She bowed. The chains fell still. The steward sent 2 boys with cloth and sand. But the prince wouldn't scrub away. The stains resisted water. They only faded slightly with salt, and even then only while no one was watching. By morning the prince had returned. Deeper. Sharper. The nobles whispered but refused to say anything aloud. They didn't want to anger her. They didn't want to believe in curses. That night, a guest from the northern provinces visited. A thick man with a twisted ring and a louder mouth. He watched Ifwiko dance with one hand on his belly and the other around a goblet. She doesn't move like a dancer, he grumbled. More like a puppet. No one responded. When the blood prince began to appear again, he stood, wobbling slightly. Staged, he declared. An illusion. He stepped forward to mock her movement. He mimicked her glide. Her spin. But when he stepped onto one of the red prints, he slipped. His arms flailed. His head struck the marble with a sound like an egg cracking. He didn't rise. For a full minute, no one moved. Then the priest leaned forward and whispered, He's dead. A hiss spread through the hall. No one screamed. They were too afraid to make noise. Ifwiko stood still in the center. Her chains pulsed like a heartbeat. The nobles looked at her. Some with suspicion. Others with awe. The landowner cleared his throat. Coincidence, he said sharply. He was drunk. He fell. No one disagreed. But no one looked at the red prince again. They avoided them now. Carefully. Fearfully. The next day, a small boy sweeping the floor said he saw the prince breathing. In and out, he whispered to the maid. Like they were waiting. The maid said nothing. She began leaving bits of charcoal by the prince. The same kind she once used to draw faces on spirit bowls. That night, the prince appeared again. More of them. Trailing from her bed. Down the corridor. To the stage. Ifwiko hadn't danced yet. But the blood was already waiting. When she stepped into the hall, the chains were humming a deeper sound now, more like a dirge than a melody. She did not resist. She began to move. Slowly. Deliberately. Darkly. No flourishes. No wasted grace. Each step landed with the weight of an unburied name. Each arc of her arm mirrored the curve of a question never answered. The nobles did not clap. They sat frozen, wine untouched, eyes wide. And the blood followed. It bloomed beneath her like petals, dark red, heavy with meaning. It trailed behind her like memory. One print landed near the foot of a woman who once ordered the beating of a servant girl for breaking a dish. The woman flinched. Another print landed before the steward. He paled. He had not slept since the chain burned him. As she danced, the chains sang louder. And louder. Until the room felt full of them, not just the ones around her ankles but phantom chains in the air, invisible, dragging across the walls, the ceilings, the throats of those who watched. Some tried to leave. But the door stuck. Others covered their ears. But the sound came through the skin. One noble sobbed silently, fingers curled against her chest. She had once laughed when a girl was whipped for falling mid-performance. The blood on the floor formed a line beneath her chair. After the dance ended, Ifwiko did not bow. She simply stood. The chains stilled. But the silence did not bring relief. It brought weight. Each guest left the hall quietly, eyes on the floor. No one laughed. No one asked for encores. The prince remained long after they left. In the days that followed, the halls emptied earlier. Meals were eaten in smaller gatherings. The court was still. Suspended. The landowner ordered that the performance space be washed with lye. But the next night the prince returned, more than before. They appeared even before Ifwiko entered. A circle now. Close. She stepped into the center. The chains did not tug her. They simply waited. She danced again. And this time she moved with purpose. Each step placed with intent. Each motion cast like a stone into still water. She no longer danced because she was made to. She danced because the ground needed to remember. Because the chains had sung enough, and now it was her turn to answer. And still the blood followed. Not from her body. From the rhythm. From the ghost. From the history pressed into her skin and the skin of every girl who had danced before her. She was not the first. But she would be the last to dance for amusement. Now she danced for reckoning. The moon was full the night it happened. Not the bloated yellow moon of harvest nor the soft, pale one that followed the rains, but a white, sharp-edged eye that looked down on the land with judgment. It rose slowly over the court's high walls, glinting through stained glass and torch smoke. No clouds passed it. No wind stirred. Inside the hall, the nobles had gathered again. Their laughter was thinner than it once was, their silks rustling nervously as they took their places. Goblets remained untouched longer. Fruit stayed whole on the plates. They said they were here for entertainment, but none of them truly watched the musicians. None of them joked as they used to. They watched her. Ifwiko entered as always, chains around her ankles, her eyes cast down. The blood prints had begun to dry slower, spreading wider beneath her, curving now into odd, curling shapes. Some said they looked like writing, letters that had no origin in any tongue they knew. The landowner said nothing as she approached. He had not spoken to her directly in weeks. Not since the guest from the north cracked his skull on one of her prints. Not since the chain began humming things no ear could explain. Now he simply waited. As did the others. Ifwiko stood in the center of the marble floor. The torches burned low. The room held its breath. The drumbeat began. She did not move. Not at first. Her head lifted slowly, neck stiff, like something waking inside stone. Her fingers twitched. Her eyes scanned the room, pausing not on the landowner, not on the steward, but on the full moon hovering perfectly in the upper window. Its light touched her face with silver, her chains with frost. She took one step. The chain clinked softly. Then another. The music was slow, cautious. The players had learned not to lead her, only to follow. She turned in a slow circle. She lifted one arm, paused mid-bend and stopped. Mid-motion. Mid-breath. Mid-beat. Everything froze. The chains rattled suddenly once, hard enough to echo against the stone. A sound like thunder before lightning. Then silence. No music. No voice. Just her, one arm in the air, one foot barely raised off the floor. Her gaze fixed on nothing. Her body a statue. It was then the nobles began to move. Not as a reaction. Not in panic. They began to dance. Not deliberately. Not in unison. Not with grace. It started with one woman, her fingers jerking, arms twitching as if pulled by invisible threads. She stood, smiling nervously as if unsure why her legs carried her. Then a man near the pillar lurched to his feet. His knees bent and twisted. He tried to sit again but his body would not allow it. He began to spin. Another. And another. One lord howled with laughter, tipping his goblet into the air as he staggered toward the center. But his laughter broke into a scream as his spine bent unnaturally, and he dropped to the ground still spinning. Their feet struck the marble too hard. Their robes tangled. Their faces twisted in confusion, in terror, in disbelief. What's happening? I can't stop, my legs won't. She's doing this, she's doing this. But Ifwiko did not move. She remained as she was. A half-finished figure, paused in the breath between moments. And the chains? They were silent. Not humming. Not singing. Not whispering. They lay slack around her feet, still, quiet, loose. A woman sobbed as she spun into the edge of a table. Her arm bent. A crack followed. She did not stop moving. One man dropped to his knees and tried to crawl out of the hall, but his hands started tapping, thudding in a beat that made no sense, his head nodding as if nodding along to music no one else could hear. The steward stumbled to the altar at the front and clung to it, begging for the priest. The girl, stop the chain. But the priest was already on the floor, twirling in circles, robe flying behind him like a banner in retreat. Ifwiko watched them. Her expression did not change. She watched as one noble slipped and cracked his mouth open on the stairs. She watched as the landowner's wife spun so violently her wig flew from her head and she dropped, flailing like a caught fish. Still no one could stop. The music returned, not from the drums, not from the flutes, but from the floor itself. From the walls. From the blood prints. They pulsed faintly, glowing now in the moonlight like hot coals. They formed patterns under the dancers' feet. Circles, spirals, lines. Like maps. Like sentences. Like spells. And all of it, all of it, was written in rhythm. In motion. Every spin they made, every collision, every stagger and stomp told a piece of the story. Their story. Not hers. This time it was they who were made to dance. And if Wiko stood unmoving as if to say, "Now you know." The landowner finally fell. His face pale, drenched in sweat. His eyes locked on hers as he twisted to the ground. His body tried to keep moving, twitching even as he screamed. "You ungrateful little thing, what are you?" But his voice broke into a gasp, then a choke, then silence. His limbs kept dancing long after he lost the will to speak. If Wiko blinked slowly. The chains remained still. The moon watched everything. By dawn, half the court lay collapsed on the floor. Some had broken bones. Others lay with eyes wide open and mouths frozen mid-scream. Some still twitched slightly, unconscious but moving. Like puppets long after the strings had been cut. If Wiko turned her face toward the door. The chains followed without resistance. They slithered behind her like calm water. As she stepped across the hall, none dared block her. Those who still stood parted wordlessly. Some still wept. Some tried to speak but found their voices gone. She paused at the exit. The blood prints were behind her now. A sea of them. A red field of rhythm and reckoning. She looked back once. The landowner stared up from the floor, shaking. She said nothing. And still the chains made no sound. She stepped out into the courtyard. The moon still hung in the sky, refusing to set. And behind her, in the hall, the sobbing started again. Not from pain. From shame. And the strange, unbearable knowledge of what it means to be made to move against your will. They tried to leave. The nobles, bruised and trembling from the night of wild movement, gathered their belongings at dawn and ordered their carriages readied. Those who could still walk staggered to the gates, bleeding through silks and laced cuffs. Some didn't speak. Some mumbled through cracked lips, "I'll leave now. I must leave now." But the gates wouldn't open. Not for them. Not entirely. The guards tried, sweating as they pushed the iron wide, but the hinges screamed and froze mid-swing. One gate opened halfway, then slammed shut again as if moved by windless hands. One noblewoman reached the threshold. Her foot hovered above the final stone in the archway. Then it twitched. Once. Twice. She spun. Not fast. Not violently. Just one smooth, gliding turn, barefoot now, her slippers lost somewhere in the night. She tried to cry out, but her mouth only opened in a round, silent gasp as her other foot joined the motion. Her body remembered the dance. The floor did too. She spun back into the courtyard, arms limp, tears on her cheeks. The others stared in horror. And then one by one they began again. It started in the feet. Always the feet. Even as they slept, huddled on mats or curled beneath silk shawls in doorways, their toes twitched. Their heels slid side to side. Their legs jerked like marionettes pulled by broken strings. The stewards watched helplessly. The priest refused to enter the great hall. The court physician cut into a noble's feet, desperate to sever tendons, only to see the wound twitch and pulse until it began dancing again, blood pooling into shapes on the floor. "If she cursed us," the physician muttered, "why didn't she say anything?" But if Wiko hadn't spoken. Not since the chains stilled. Not since the full moon stared down and found its rhythm in her silence. She hadn't even returned to the hall. She remained in the abandoned quarters of the servants' wing, where walls cracked from damp and vines grew through the cracks. She sat quietly on a mat and listened to the floor hum through the stone. Sometimes she heard crying from the other side of the compound. Sometimes she heard laughter, shrill and broken, as the dancers tried to convince themselves this was all temporary. But mostly she heard the music that had replaced music. The rhythm beneath skin. The chain no longer guided her. It waited at her feet like a sleeping pet. When she touched it, it was warm, not metal anymore but memory. A page rewritten in muscle and bone. New guests arrived on the third day. They had heard whispers, nobles from distant provinces, merchants, bored wives of minor kings. They came curious, skeptical. They entered the court with raised brows and scoffing smiles. I heard she bewitches with her eyes. They say the floor drinks lies. She's just a girl with clever ankles. But they dance too. Not at first. Not in ceremony. They laughed over wine, pointing at the stain-marked marble, shaking their heads as they walked across it. Then their heels stuttered. Their fingers twitched. One bent low to tie her sandal, and froze mid-kneel, her arms slowly rising like she'd forgotten what she meant to do. Another stepped toward the courtyard, and twirled sharply before falling to one knee. Within minutes they were part of it. Part of the rhythm. Part of the punishment. They tried to say they chose to dance. But the tears betrayed them. Make it stop, one guest sobbed, mouth foaming with exhaustion. I haven't slept in 2 days. They brought in a choir from a neighboring town, hoping to drown the silence with holy song. But the choir began dancing mid-hymn. Voices never stopped singing, but their feet betrayed them, moving faster, harder, their song turning into a chant, a dirge, a scream. They collapsed by nightfall. The rumor spread fast. She cursed the floor. The dancer made the court her drum. Even silence sings her name now. But if Wiko hadn't said a word, not once. She moved only to eat, only to bathe. Sometimes to stand beneath the tree where her mother had once tied ribbon offerings for safe journeys. She stared up at it and listened. The tree swayed gently and she imagined it dancing too. One night, a steward came crawling through the servant's wing, his eyes wild. Please, he begged. Please say something. Say it's done. She said nothing. He grasped her feet and begged for forgiveness. The chain curled around his wrist and hummed once. He didn't return to the hall. He stayed in the garden, spinning slowly for the rest of his days, surrounded by weeds. The landowner was the last to break. He locked himself in the upper quarters, surrounded by charms and mirrors and thick carpets. He drank heavily. He avoided stepping onto bare stone. But even in bed his legs moved. Under the covers. Then in the open. Then down the stairs. By the end of the week he was dancing on the balcony, tears falling from his chin into the garden below, mouth full of prayers that didn't belong to him. The floor inside the great hall grew darker. Not dirtier, darker. The blood stains pulsed now. The prints spread into symbols. The rhythm continued even without music. A noble collapsed mid-dance, her knees striking stone with a sound like cracked bells. She lay still. Her feet kept moving. By morning her arms moved too. Some died upright, twirling in place. Others froze like statues, breathless, caught in poses too grand for the living. Those who remained avoided looking at the dancer's chamber. They feared even her silence now. What kind of girl does not speak? What kind of girl lets the world scream instead of her? What kind of girl remakes a floor into a graveyard? They sent a messenger to her. A boy, small, with a folded prayer in his hand. He stepped inside the chamber and trembled. If Wiko turned to him slowly. He extended the paper with shaking fingers. She did not read it. She did not touch it. She only stared. The boy began to sway. He tried to back away, but his feet began to tap softly. He dropped the note and ran, screaming, stumbling into a spin. They didn't send another. Eventually, a priestess came from the hills. She wore bones in her hair and silence on her lips. She stepped inside the hall barefoot. She touched the floor. She did not dance. She listened. Then she said simply, "It was never a curse," and left. No one followed her. No one understood. But the floor did. And the dancer? She remained in her corner of the world. Unmoving. Unbroken. Unspeaking. And somewhere deep beneath the court, in the earth soaked with blood, the bones of old dancers shifted softly, as if smiling. They found him kneeling beside the old chain cabinet, hands wrapped in cloth soaked with honey and desperation. His lips were cracked. His eyes gleamed with something wild, not hope, but obsession. He had once been a poet, this noble. A man of soft words and softer hands. But dancing had ruined him. He no longer walked properly. His knees buckled every fourth step. His shoulders twitched when he tried to sit still. His feet whispered across the floor even in sleep. He had broken 3 toes against stone walls, dancing in his dreams. He cried when he woke. He bled when he tried to stop. She holds us still, he muttered now, fingers unwrapping trembling silver cuffs from the cabinet shelf. If we bind her it ends. We dance because she walks free. He waited until dusk. He followed her through the courtyard. She no longer hid in the shadows. If Wiko walked freely now, not like a girl unshackled but like someone who had never known chains to begin with. The rhythm moved around her, not through her. Her feet barely made a sound. Even the birds hushed when she passed. He saw her near the garden beside the old sundial and crept forward. The cuffs gleamed. He lunged. His hand closed around her wrist, and immediately began to smoke. A scream split the evening. Not hers. The silver glowed white-hot. His skin peeled back. Flesh bubbled and curled. The bones of his fingers showed clean and bright before blackening. He dropped the cuffs, clutching his ruined hand, howling. If Wiko did not move. She turned her head slowly toward him, eyes empty of cruelty, empty of pity. Just stillness. Just knowing. The silver cuffs lay in the dust. They hissed like coals in water. No one touched them again. The noble rolled on the ground, weeping. Not just from pain but from failure. From shame. He crawled away on his elbows, dragging his half-dead hand like a trailing thought behind him. He died 3 nights later, spinning in his sleep. No one claimed the body. And still the dancers danced. Even the ones who tried to hide. Even those who left food uneaten and prayed to foreign gods. They twitched in the corridors. They turned in place behind shuttered doors. One woman tried to bury her feet in mud. They found her dead in a half-dug hole, her legs kicking up dust even after her chest stopped rising. Something in the ground had learned how to move. The garden shifted next. It began subtly. A leaf twitching the wrong way in windless air. A vine curling twice around a stone before pausing. Then the statues. Carved in honor of forgotten ancestors, they had stood still for decades. Their feet were chiseled flat against the bases, robes flowing in immortal poise. But one day a steward passed the weeping goddess near the pond and stopped. Her foot was raised. Only slightly. A chip of marble cracked beneath it as if the heel had moved. He laughed, uneasy. Came back with 2 guards. By then her other foot was off the base. The toes pointed forward. As if stepping into rhythm. Then the hunter statue near the gates began tapping. Soft at first. Barely audible. Then faster. The marble boomed with pressure. The children of the servants began placing fruit offerings at their feet. Not from fear. From awe. Then the paintings joined. They said the eyes in portraits no longer followed the viewer. They closed instead. As if the painted figures were tired. Dancing behind canvas. Hiding their exhaustion. Some paintings blurred altogether. Brushstrokes once perfect now streaked. Women who once smiled in stillness now had parted lips, blurred arms, the impression of movement where none should be. They sealed the gallery. It didn't help. Every frame thudded at night as if something inside beat against the paint. The land itself hummed. Stones cracked and rearranged into arcs. Birdsong fell silent at dawn and returned only at dusk, syncopated, strange. Even the shadows flickered now, not with flame but with pulse. No one tried to bind her again. They didn't dare. She walked freely among them, a girl who had never spoken a word since the chains fell still. But everyone heard her now. In their feet. In their blood. In the silver that burned. The first note came at twilight. It rose from the marble floor of the great hall like mist, soft and low, weaving itself through pillars and curtains, coiling through corridors, curling beneath doors. No one touched an instrument. No drumstick fell. No flute stirred. And yet the melody filled the space like breath. It was sorrowful. A sound made from ache, not air. The nobles froze where they stood, mid-step, mid-sob, mid-spin. Their chests rose with it involuntarily. Eyes widened. Mouths opened but no words came. The music moved through them, not around them. Their skin hummed with the vibration. It was a woman's voice and a broken harp and the sound of chains dragged across memory. It didn't stop. Not that night. Not the next. Not ever. They searched the walls, the cellars, the rafters. They tore open locked trunks. They dismantled the musicians' quarters, snapping bows and strings in frustration. But the sound never came from the things they knew. It came from the walls. The ceilings. The very air. Some said it wasn't music at all, just grief made audible. Others swore they heard verses in it. Lullabies in languages no longer spoken. Names that had never been given. The floor became an instrument. The windows trembled like chimes. Even the trees in the garden shook rhythmically, leaves sighing in harmony. Wherever Ifwiko walked, the music followed. She did not command it. She never moved her lips. But the sound traced her like a shadow, low and mournful when she sat, sharp and spiraling when she passed beneath the arches. Birds went silent when she neared. Dogs lay flat, eyes wide, heads low. She spent most days now beneath the tree her mother once tied ribbon to, the same tree that used to be overlooked, unnoticed. Its roots stretched deeper now. Its bark darkened to something nearly black. Moss shaped itself into patterns there, like fingers pressed into soil long ago. Ifwiko sat beneath it, legs folded, back straight, eyes closed. She did not sleep. She listened. And the music played. In the hall, the dancers did not stop. They had long since ceased trying to resist. They sobbed as they moved, each step a plea. Their bodies thin and trembling, dresses dark with sweat and memory, arms moving like puppet strings dipped in guilt. When they fell, they twitched until the music swelled again and forced them upright. It never sped up. It never grew joyful. Only slower. More mournful. More ancient. The nobles wept without knowing why. Some had forgotten what they'd done, what made them dance. But the floor remembered. The blood remembered. The rhythm carried it. New servants covered the mirrors. No one wanted to see themselves. The music echoed in the reflecting glass. One boy saw his reflection mouthing lyrics while his own lips were still. He refused to look again. They tried stuffing wax into their ears. But the sound came through bone. Through teeth. Through the soles of their feet. And when the youngest daughter of a northern chieftain screamed at the girl under the tree, screamed for her to stop, the music grew louder. Not violent. Not angry. Just deeper. And that night, the girl's feet moved in her sleep, dragging her down the corridor, down the stairs, through the courtyard. She danced into the hall and collapsed. She rose again. And danced. No one dared scream after that. No one begged. They watched Ifwiko with a reverence so close to terror it became indistinguishable. She had not cursed them. She had not touched them. She had not uttered a single word. And yet their world unraveled. The music played every grief they'd hidden. Every cruelty they'd swallowed. Every girl they had silenced and chained. Now they danced to it. Every dusk, a new verse emerged, low and heavy like thunder inside water. The walls dripped with sound. The garden bent with it. Even the sun, it seemed, took longer to rise. One day the hall will collapse. One day the tree will split the marble with its roots. But until then the music plays. And Ifwiko listens. The storm came without wind. No warning in the leaves. No shift in the air. Just the sudden crack of sky splitting open. A jagged white flash that struck the top of the estate's bell tower with such force the old iron bell dropped and shattered the floor beneath it. And then fire. But not the kind they knew. It came ribboning through the rafters, orange and gold, flickering not with fury but with grace. It weaved. It danced. The flames did not rush. They stepped. Curled. Twirled down stairwells like silk tossed from a goddess's hand. No screams came at first. Only silence, stunned and wide-eyed, as nobles turned toward the glowing light blooming in the corners of their rooms, the licking heat in the folds of their bedsheets. A steward reached for water, and watched the bowl boil before his hand touched it. And yet, the fire made no smoke. No choking blackness. Only warmth. Light. Movement. The dancers in the great hall tried to run, but their feet betrayed them. Even in terror they spun. Even in panic they bowed to rhythm. One tried to crawl. His fingertips burst into golden sparks. Another flung herself toward the doors, but the flames met her like a partner, wrapping gently around her waist, spinning her until her scream turned into a sob. Ifwiko stood beneath the archway of the courtyard when the fire reached her. It greeted her like a memory. She stepped forward. And the flames parted. They curled away from her feet. Brushed her arms like wind. Wove through her hair like strands of light. Not a thread of her cloth burned. Not a single lock of her hair smoked. She walked into the burning corridor, and behind her the fire changed. It no longer clung to curtains or feasted on chairs. It began to shape itself. Into forms. Into figures. At first just hints, the curve of a back, the angle of a raised wrist, the tilt of a bowed head. Then clearer. Dozens of them. Girls. Young. Thin as ash, strong as iron. All made of fire. All dancing. Some had chains still dragging behind them, melting into the floor. Some raised their arms skyward, mouths open in voiceless songs. One bent to touch the floor, and it pulsed beneath her, echoing the rhythm that had never stopped. They rose behind Ifwiko like shadows she had never summoned but had always known. She did not look back. She walked through the east wing where the paintings once hung, now curling into smoke. As she passed, the eyes of the portraits turned toward her, and closed. The fire followed her like a procession. It did not leap ahead. It waited for her feet, matching her pace. When she reached the chamber where she had once been chained, the walls burst into brilliant white flame, and one last figure stepped from it. She had silver cuffs on her ankles, but they melted away like wax. She looked at Ifwiko. She bowed, and vanished. Outside the storm raged, but the rain did not fall. The lightning danced above the estate in spirals. From far away, villagers saw the light and whispered that the sky was mourning. Some said the estate had caught fire and the dancer had died. But others, those who had seen her, heard the rhythm in their own feet long after leaving, said she had become the fire. Not consumed. Transformed. In the ashes of the great hall, no bodies were found. Only blackened marble etched with footprints that pulsed when touched. And a single silver cuff, melted into a ring. The estate never rebuilt. The land grew wild again. But the grass around the old tree never burned. And when storms pass overhead, they say lightning dances across the ruins in shapes too graceful to be chaos. The fire had not destroyed. It had remembered. And then it had danced. The estate is gone. Where once marble gleamed and silk swept across cold floors, there is now soil, dark, soft, living. Grass grows where chains once clinked. Wildflowers bloom where nobles once watched and laughed. The great hall is memory. The tower is sky. Only the roots remain, tangled deep in stone that remembers fire. In the center of the ruin stands a hut. Simple. Round. Made from clay and ashwood. The door is always open. The windows always bare. It sits beside the tree, older now, thick and bowed, its bark the color of burnt honey, its branches filled with wind and stories. No birds nest in it. No one dares carve into its trunk. But when it rains, its leaves make a sound like soft footsteps. She lives there still. Fuiko. Not as a prisoner. Not as a ghost. But as something else. Something the land decided not to forget. She no longer speaks. But she no longer needs to. She sits on a mat near the door, spine straight, arms resting in her lap, feet bare against the dirt. She watches the horizon like it's telling her secrets. She breathes like she's measuring the earth's sleep. Children come to her. One by one. Never in groups. Never loud. They approach with soft steps, instinctively quiet. Something about the air around the hut presses words back into mouths and teaches them to listen first. They sit with her in silence. Sometimes for minutes. Sometimes for hours. And when they leave, they do not run. They walk like rhythm lives in their ankles. They step like music is a responsibility. Some grow up to be drummers. Others become farmers, mothers, herders, midwives. But none of them dance without meaning. Not anymore. The people say, to dance in this land now is to speak with your whole body. To lie is to trip. To move without feeling is to bleed. Even celebrations are different. No more flailing joy. Only deep-rooted movement. Arms raised like branches. Feet pressing stories into soil. The dances are slow. Honest. Heavy with memory. And if Wiko watches them from her doorway, her eyes still, unreadable, the color of warm stone. She rarely moves. Sometimes a finger twitches. Sometimes a foot shifts barely. But even in stillness she teaches. Even in silence she echoes. On stormy nights the people stay indoors. Not from fear but from reverence. Because the lightning still dances above the hill where the estate once stood. And sometimes the earth beneath their feet shifts. Not a tremor. Not a quake. But a motion. A ripple in the ground. A heartbeat beneath the soil. As if the land itself remembers her steps. They say on those nights in the garden that reclaimed the hall, the footprints reappear, glowing faintly, trailing in circles too precise to be chance. Children sometimes glimpse shapes in the rain. Not frightening ones. Just shadows with long legs and tilted heads. Girls in fire. Boys in ash. Chains falling like petals. They vanish when spoken to. But they leave warmth in their place. Sometimes someone leaves red cloth at Ifwiko's door. Or a pair of small shoes. Or silver shaped into a flower. She never touches them. But they always disappear by morning. No one calls her cursed anymore. No one dares. They call her the still one. The flame walker. The girl who unchained the dance. Some think she sleeps with her eyes open. Others say she died long ago and the hut only holds her rhythm. But those who sit beside her know better. They feel her presence like a second pulse. They feel their own breath slow to match hers. They leave quieter. Stronger. One day the hut will fall. One day the tree will lie flat. One day the footprints will fade completely. But not yet. Not while the ground still stirs in moonlight. Not while the thunder hums her song. Not while even silence moves with grace.